She pulled the white fleece over my shoulders. I can feel the black tulle of my witch costume crunch against my chest in painful and sandpapery scratches. I took a step back so I can brush her arm away from me without pushing her. I don't want to wear this, I whined and scrunched my lips into a frown. Too bad, she replied as she turned away from me to dig through the console near the door. I took a deep sigh as her hand reappeared with 2 purple gloves. Hands, she said, and I quickly threw my hands behind my back in tight fists. No, I said. I'll wear the stupid jacket, but there's no way I'm wearing those. She frowned at me, the kind where her eyebrows dipped into V-shaped birds. My hands were beginning to ache from my tight fists, but I wasn't going to crumple, not this time. Her face softened, and I let myself take a breath. Fine, she replied. But put them in your pocket of your jacket. You'll thank me later. I grabbed the gloves out of her palm and stuffed them into the side pockets of the white fleece. I already planned on dumping this jacket the minute I reached Casey's house. I rolled my eyes as I turned away from her, and I faced the gold-framed mirror in their entryway. My eyes sparkled with gray eyeshadow from the smoky eye kit I'd swiped out of Louise's room, and craft glitter I found in my mom's scrapbooking supplies. I tried to paint my lips in a bloody red, but Mom intervened and handed me some Dr. Pepper lip smackers instead. There's no reason to try to grow up so fast, she said. You would say that, I said. You're already old. Hey, her voice regaining a hissing sharpness. Attitude. What? I replied, my voice rising with teenage angst. I turned towards her and opened my arms in exclamation. You don't know what it's like to be my age in this century. You're either everything or you're nothing. Well, you're my everything. She smiled as she said it. Oh my God, I grumbled under my breath. Listen, you have 2 options here, she began. You can A, check your attitude and realize you're lucky to even be going out on a Thursday night. B, you can stay home with me and hand out candy. Yeah, I said dryly. I'll go with option A. She smiled at me, and I replied with a tight smile and hooded eyes. When she turned her back, I gnarled my face into a mocking version of hers. She turned toward me again, and I quickly softened back to my complacent smile. One for the road, she said as she threw me a piece of candy. I unwrapped the plastic orange wrapping and carefully peeled back the black wax paper off of the chocolate and popped the sweet into my mouth. My mouth exploded with the supple creaminess of milk chocolate and the pleasant grittiness of peanut butter. All right, she said, go forth and trick or treat. Mom, I moaned. We aren't trick or treating. We're just hanging out. And going door to door for candy. Just a few houses, I relented. Do you want your pumpkin? She said, nodding her head towards the plastic pumpkin basket on the counter. No, I snapped. I'm not 5 years old. Clearly, she said. I'll just take a pillowcase. She replied, and I felt the anger begin to rise in my belly again. You are not using our nice sheets as a bag. Everybody uses them. I gritted my teeth. She lifted her hands up into a stop motion. "Fine," she said, "but you're washing it tomorrow." I shrugged and ran towards my bedroom. I laid my body across the bed to reach for the pillow, ripping the yellow pillowcase off and throwing it over my shoulder. I threw the pillow back into its place with a muffled plop, but it had too much force, and it fell off the side of my bed, out of view. "Oh well," I said to myself, not pausing to pick it up. I walked back out to the entryway, and my mom was standing with her back against the wall and a small white stick of Tootsie Pop hanging out of her lips. "Have fun," she said. "Be safe." "I will," I said. "Be back by 10, she replied. I was about to contest, but she popped the lollipop from her lips and cut me off. "School tomorrow. Non-negotiable." I mouthed the letters okay, and I opened the door. A gust of cold air greeted me, and after I shut the door, I pulled the fleece closer to my chest. The neighborhood was littered with little kids running from house to house, with their plastic pumpkins swinging back and forth as they ran. The usually peaceful night was filled with excited squeals and delightfully frightened screams. Parents lagged behind the mobs of children, talking amongst each other. A few carried metal cans with cozies obscuring the brand. I took off in a run towards Casey's house. "Hi, Maylene," I heard one of the parents bellow. I waved my hand in the air without turning around. "Hey," I heard a boy's voice behind me. "Wait up." I slowed down to a jog and turned to see Seth walking to catch up with me. He was wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt with a long black cape pulled over his shoulders. He had a pair of plastic teeth in his mouth, and when he smiled, the sharp plastic points gnawed against each other. "Cool costume," he said. I smiled into the darkness and swerved out of the way of two little Power Rangers clobbering towards us. "Thanks," I replied, but it came out more of a whisper. "Who all's coming tonight?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied. "Probably just the usual group. Casey, Sarah, Rachel." "Oh, great," he said. "I'm the only guy again." I laughed, and it came out in a horrid high-pitched crackle. I slapped my hand over my mouth, and Seth began to laugh too. We grew up next door to one another. When we were young, we would build forts and play Pinecone War with his older brother. We continued to hang out during middle school. We'd swap Harry Potter books and ride our bikes to the library. It was our first year of high school, and this had been a harder transition. He'd started playing soccer, which meant he had more friends. I continued to reel away from sports like poison ivy. I'd joined photography club and fallen semi-in love with Carter, an overconfident doodler who was designing his own graphic novel about a goth vigilante and who told me attending homecoming dance was ingesting social propaganda. "I'm surprised you didn't have plans," I said. "We always spend Halloween together," he replied as he punched me in the arm. "Are you coming to homecoming?" he asked, and I felt my breath audibly catch. I don't know," I stammered. "I asked Jessica," he said. "You should totally come with us." "Yeah," I said, trying to hide the deflation in my voice. "Maybe." We reached Casey's house, and she was standing on her porch wearing a gown of white jagged fabric. When she turned, her face was powdered white with dark circles drawn under her eyes and fake blood pooling out of her mouth. "Enter if you dare," she screamed towards us and erupted in laughter. "Oh my gosh," she fussed. "Both of you are hardly scary." She wrapped her arms around her waist. I just wanted to try something new, I said, shifting uncomfortably in my black tights and orange skirt. Well, Casey smiled, you do look killer. I laughed and ran up the stairs to give her a hug. Her dress smelled like mothballs, and the powder from her face choked me in a chalky fog. Hey, she said, pushing me off. Watch the makeup. And anyway, witches and ghosts are kind of mortal enemies. What about vampires? Seth said as he jumped onto the porch, his voice lisping beneath the plastic teeth. He waved his cape around like it was blowing in the wind. Where's Rachel and Sarah? I asked. They're meeting us at the park, Casey replied. Just let me go grab a flashlight. Casey disappeared inside of her house as a group of kids pushed towards us to the front door. They rang the doorbell multiple times and chanted, trick or treat, give me something good to eat. The door creaked open to reveal black nothingness. One of the braver kids poked their head through the opening, and Casey jumped out into view with a deafening howl, baring her bloody teeth. The kids screamed and jumped back towards us. Seth buckled over and began laughing as Casey continued to shriek into the night. You scared us, one of the kids yelled, but his voice was soaked in elation. Grab your candy, Casey bellowed, or get lost. They dug greedy little fists into the bowl and grabbed as many pieces they could fit into their pint-sized palms. Casey returned the bowl inside and reappeared with a flashlight. Let's go, she screamed and howled like a wolf. Seth and I reciprocated howls, and our voices echoed across the cul-de-sac. I love Halloween, Casey said. Oh, I replied with a chuckle. I had no idea. It's the only holiday when acting like a total freak is encouraged. She smiled towards us. If only high school was like this. She leaped into the air and spun in small pirouettes across the street, her sneakers crunching on loose asphalt. Oh, come on, Seth said. It's not that bad. Okay, superstar, Casey replied. You're not allowed to have an opinion. He laughed, but he complied. Not all of us are gifted beautiful normalcy, she replied, and the ability to accumulate and assimilate. Now you're making it sound negative, he sighed. I think any version of life where you're not getting tater tots thrown at your head is pretty positive, she said, her face never dropping a smile. People suck, he finally replied. So do vampires, I spat back with a laugh. We reached the park, and it was bathed in ivory moonlight and the greasy glow of yellow street lamps. A couple swings drifted back and forth in the wind, offering a metallic squeak into the air. The park was empty, and I turned towards Casey. They aren't here, I said. Oh, they are here, and they're invisible, she replied. I guess they're running late, Seth said. God, he's back with his uniformity. I walked across the park and sat on one of the drifting swings. I kicked my feet against the soft white sand, and my body began to swing back and forth. I kicked my feet harder, and I rose in the air with force. The cold night air whipped against my skin like shrapnel. Get over here, I heard Seth yell from across the park. I stopped pumping my legs, and I let myself fall back onto the ground. I dug my shoes into the sand, and eventually the swing slowed enough for me to hop off. Seth and Casey were huddled around a tree at the far part of the park. I walked up and Seth stepped aside so I can see. Tacked to the tree was a red pushpin and a piece of yellow-lined paper. At the top of the paper, there was a picture of a crudely drawn goat with tiny sharp horns, and below the goat, the words "trick or treat" were scrawled across the paper in dull pencil. The lines were flat and rounded, and the lead was smudged. Behind the tree, there was a small path, indented in the brush. Casey immediately lit up and took a step toward the path. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Going down this freaky-ass trail?" she mocked. "Duh." "This is sketchy," I replied, my heart beating faster. "Come on," she yelled as she began to walk into the woods. Seth put his hand against my back and gave me a little push. "We've got nothing better to do," he said. I gulped down the accumulated spit in my mouth and stepped forward. The trail was very small, and when you walked, thin branches smacked across your skin. Our feet crunched against dead leaves, and at one point, we had to duck under a giant limb to continue down the trail. Finally, we saw a small clearing up ahead. I heard the drifting of soft music slide past my ears. "Do you hear that?" I hissed. Casey and Seth paused, and without the sound of our crunching feet, I could clearly hear the baritone of an organ. Casey kept walking, and she picked up her step, practically skipping towards the clearing. She swayed as she walked, the strips of fabric on her dress catching wind and dancing along. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she stopped suddenly. I jogged ahead to see what she was looking at. When I reached the edge, I can hear the music increase in volume. The clearing, void of tree covering, was dipped in that soft ivory moonlight. In the middle of the clearing, a person rocked back and forth on a wooden rocking chair. I felt bile begin to rise in my throat, and I pulled Casey's dress back toward the path. She didn't budge. I felt Seth's body pressed against mine as he curved his neck to see into the clearing. His breath hitched. The rocking began to increase in speed, and then the neck of the person snapped back towards us, revealing a red plastic devil mask. The person didn't move. They just stared at us through fake plastic eyes. A silver candy bowl sat perched in their lap, its large human hands wrapped around the edges. "Hi, kids." The voice fell out of thin, closed-mouth smirk, the shiny black goatee of the devil bobbing up and down as it spoke. It was a man's voice, cloaked in silky, polite eloquence. We didn't respond. I was now grasping an entire fistful of Casey's dress, and my ears were ringing with the lofting sounds of the organ. "You're a bit old," the voice began, "to be trick-or-treating." It was always surprising when it spoke because its mouth was hidden behind that plastered smile and dark mustache. There was no movement of the lips to indicate the beginning of a sentence, and I felt myself jump each time there was a noise. The horns of the mask glittered with shine in the moonlight, and it began rocking back and forth again. "Do you care for some candy?" it asked. I took a step back, bumping into Seth. "Let's get out of here," I hissed to Casey. She didn't reply. "Come closer," he began again, his voice still dripping in artificial civility. "All I require is that you say trick or treat. And you can take your pick." He motioned down towards the pile of sweets. "Hell, I'll give you this whole bowl," he said. "I'm feeling generous." He stopped rocking and his head snapped back towards us. He shook the candy bowl vigorously. "Say it," he said, his voice beginning to lose its artificial sweetness. "Say it!" he bellowed towards us. "Let's go." Seth grabbed my shoulder and pushed me back towards the trail, his voice shaking as it left his lips. "Seth," the voice cooed from behind us. "Why are you leaving so soon?" My stomach dropped and I heard Seth's breath begin to increase in rhythm. "Seth, don't you want your candy?" This is just a bad joke," Seth breathed. "Maylene," the voice sang, and I turned towards it. "Tell Seth to come get his candy." The voice started to drop to a growl. "No?" the voice asked. "What about you, Casey? Don't you want your Halloween treat?" Casey turned towards me and her eyes were wild and frantic. I pushed her toward the trail and screamed for her to run. We began sprinting towards the park and the branches sliced against our faces, this time with more force. I felt a trickle of blood from above my eye, but I kept running. "Maylene," I heard the voice behind me, so close behind me. I turned towards the voice and saw the devil perched on a thick branch of a tree in the distance. Its large body was crouched into a squat, and it must have been at least 10 feet in the air. My head began to spin, but I had to keep running. I turned back toward the trail and whack, my head hit the low branch, and I fell to the ground with an awful heavy thud. My vision prickled a bit with hundreds of small dots of light, like I was staring at the static on a television screen. I heard something drop from above and hit the ground with a substantial weight. I tried to move, but my body had grown laden with the blow. The static began to whisper away into blackness, and then I began to sink into nothingness. When I awoke, I was laying in the soft white sand. I rubbed my fingers through the tiny granules, and my vision began to return in dark watercolors. Casey was standing over me, her hands pressed softly on the sides of my face. "Oh my gosh," she cried, hot wet tears against my skin. You fell off the swing." I felt myself finally exhale a worried breath. "You hit your head." Seth appeared in my vision now. He was walking nervously back and forth. "We called your mom." I groaned and pushed myself off the ground. The cold had wrapped around my body while I was unconscious, and I shivered against the wind. I reached my hands into my pocket to pull out my gloves. My right hand was met with the soft wool fabric, but my left hand only felt emptiness. "I lost a glove," I said to no one in particular. I pulled myself into a standing position and looked around. The glove was not there. I turned away as the park lit up with the bright white of headlights. My mom jumped out of the car and rushed towards me. "What happened?" she said, her voice hissing again. "She fell off the swing," Casey said. "She hit her head pretty bad." That night, my mom and I sat in the ER room far past 10 p.m. She'd unexpectedly brought the candy bowl with her in her haste. So we poured the leftover contents into her purse and unwrapped chocolates in the sour sterileness of the waiting room. I didn't have a concussion, but I did need 3 stitches across my head. They numbed my skin, but the needle still burned as it pierced my flesh. "Guess I should have went as Frankenstein for Halloween," I said, walking with a fake injured gait toward the exit. My mom laughed and we listened to the radio on the way home. No negotiations allowed me to skip school the next day, and I curled up on the couch watching Twilight Zone until my mom came home and made me clean my room. "Maylene," I heard my mom seethe from the kitchen. I tromped towards the room to make sure my feet were audibly scraping against the laminate in my hesitation. "What have I told you about taking care of your belongings?" she asked. I didn't reply, I just stared at her and blinked a few times. "Money doesn't grow on trees," she said. Real mom cliche. "We can't just buy new gloves every time you are careless," she continued. She tossed the purple glove across the table to me. The glove slid on the granite counter and slowed to a stop near my hand. I noticed it had specks of dried leaves attached to it. "Where did you find it?" I asked. "In our mailbox," she replied. I lifted the glove to my hand, and the soft purple fabric was worn and inlaid in dirt and pilling at the fingertips. I laid the glove on the palm of my hand, and I noticed that there was something inside. I waited for my mom to turn back to the sink and finish accosting me about my unconcern. I slowly put my hand inside the glove and pulled out a crumpled piece of yellow-lined paper.